All right, so we're going to talk about the next step or the next stage in making our little tower thing here. And the first thing that I want to talk about is, right now how bad the tower looks, because it's very faceted. In other words, what that means is it doesn't have a lot of vertices and a lot of faces, and so it looks like it's made out of flat objects, right? We don't want it to look like it's made out of flat objects. So the first thing that you might think of when you're trying to make this look better is to click into the object or edit, tab in, and then you might think, well, I can hit the subdivide a couple times, and you'll notice that honestly, it does work, but it doesn't. You added vertices, but you didn't add visual quality. You could also try hitting the smooth vertices or vertex button there a few times, and it will work a little bit, but it's still not going to look all that great. It doesn't look horrible, actually. So let me undo those changes here. Go right back to where we were. There's a much easier way to do this, but it comes with some issues, as we're going to see. So if I want to, I can click on my object. I'm going to go over to the wrench, which is where we add all of our modifiers. Click on the modifier here, and I'm going to add a Subdivision Surface modifier. Now what that does is it messes things up pretty bad. But I knew this was going to be the case. It basically smooths and adds vertices to your object without actually adding real vertices. So I can bump this up to 3, and it looks pretty good here, but obviously we're having some problems down here. We're having problems. The door is all messed up, and the top is all messed up. So we have got to do some work. So here's how this works. If I go into edit mode, you'll see that all of my vertices and my edges and everything, they're all still there, and they're all exactly the way that I left them. So I can control how this modifier works with a simple thing which is called edge creasing, or not creasing, but edge sharpness. So I'm going to take my edge selector, and I'm going to Alt right click, and I get the entire edge here. Then I can go to Mesh, Edges, and I can go to Edge Crease, or, as I prefer to do, hit Shift and the E key on the keyboard. Put your mouse towards the middle of the object to be able to do this well, because you are going to be moving the mouse away from the center of the object to control how much creasing you give to this edge. So I hit Shift and E, and as I move the mouse further away, it creases those edges in varying amounts. If you look down at the bottom left, let me hit undo here really quickly. Right here, I can't circle this with my mouse because I was doing the thing. Right here, you'll see the amount that I'm creasing the edges from 0 to 1. So it's anywhere from 0 to 1. It actually can go from 0 to -1 too, as I'll show you in a second. So if I hit Shift E, that's 1. And as I move it closer back towards the center, it will start adjusting it in fractions. So right now 0.592, 0.637, 0.7, and so on and so forth. And it just keeps going up. All right. Now, if I left click, that hammers that value down. Until I do something new, I could go in here and type in a more even number. So right now 0.713, I could type in 0.800, whatever I wanted to do. In this case, we want to go full, I think, full 1.0, and that looks really good. If you want to uncrease an edge that has already been creased, now I could just uncrease it right now by typing in 0. But let's say I did a few things, and now I can't go back and undo, or it's tomorrow, or 3 days from now, and I want this edge to stay, I want this edge to be rounder. I can select it again, then I can hit Shift E, and this time I'm going to start my mouse further away from the middle, and then as I drag it towards the middle, you'll notice the numbers down in the bottom left-hand corner, I'm going in negatives this time. So the amount of edge crease is actually relative. So it was at 1, now I'm going negative, and if I go all the way back to -1, it will go back to the way it was when I originally added the modifier. But in this case, we want it nice and sharp, so there we go. Sharp edge. Now you'll notice that that did not help us up top, so each edge is controlled very individually. You'll also notice that our door is an absolute wreck. I've turned the door itself off, and what's happening is the subdivision surface modifier is actually basically putting a skin over the door. We're going to talk about why that is, but essentially it has to do with the fact, and we're going to deal with how to fix this in a different demo tomorrow. It has to do with these vertices and how they're kind of hanging out over here, but they're not actually going anywhere. This is one of the major problems with the Booleans that I did in the previous demo. We'll figure that out later. So this will not get fixed today in this demo, but we'll figure it out. If you have Booleans and you do a subdivision surface modifier, this will be an issue, and we will talk about how to fix it later, and you don't have to freak out. It will get fixed. Okay, so let's head on back up here. So now we've got to figure out how to get these, our turrets, to look a lot better. There's a couple of ways that you could do it. First off, you could sit here and individually select each one. So I could go to Edge Select, and I could sit here and select, you know, because you want all of these to be selected. In fact, you probably want these edges that are going, you know, sideways here, horizontally, you want those selected too. But I like doing things as easily as possible. So I'm going to go 3 on the numpad, which takes me to a side view. Then I'm going to hit the Z key and go to wireframe mode so that I can select through the object. That's the easiest way of doing that. There are other ways that will allow you to select through the object. I'm going to change to vertices select mode. Then I'm going to hit the A key once to deselect, so make sure that there's nothing selected. If you do that and everything highlights, then that means nothing was selected, so you hit the A key again. Now nothing is selected. Then I'm going to hit the C key. This gives me a little brush. This is the circle selector. And you can see I can just click with left click with the mouse, and I can just paint in everything. Now there's a reason why I used vertice select mode instead of edge select mode. And that reason is I didn't want to select, let me right click to get out of this, I didn't want to select all of this stuff down here. Okay, now it is highlighted, but you can see how it's fading out. The reason why it's fading out is because I did not select the vertices at the bottom. If, however, let me just show you, I was in edge select mode and I grabbed the circle selector, you can see how it actually selects the entire length of that edge. We don't want that. We only want these top ones, okay? So we'll go back to vertices select mode. There we go. Whoops, I missed a couple. There we go. Make sure I've got everything. Now I'm going to scroll up here, go back to solid mode. Now we do not want the edges here selected. We do not want to crease these edges here, most likely. And the reason for that is it would probably create a pretty nasty look where you would have like a weird crease there. So first what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, go to edge select mode, and I'm going to right click every other one. Now this is still pretty tedious, but it's a lot easier than the alternative, which was to select every one of these individually. So I'll just go ahead and do that. That's not too bad. And then I need to go back and do it on the inside as well. And then I'll just give it a quick spin around to make sure that I've actually done each one. And I have. So now that I've got everything selected the way I want to, I can hit Shift and E again, starting at the center, and I can move away from the center. Now I can choose different levels of adjustment, you know, to create some different rounded edges, but we pretty much probably want it pretty close to 1. So maybe, maybe 0.95. It's really close to the center there. So I can go back in and I can type 0.95. Oops, that's 85. 0.95. And now I've got a pretty good sharpening happening here. Now, let's tab out of edit mode. And now you can see I've got a funny little thing happening. And this is very common when you're doing this subdivision surface modifier, where it's trying to transition from an edge that was creased to an edge that's not creased. And so what it does is it gradually fades out. Okay, you can see that. It's gradually fading out from a creased edge to a non-creased edge. And it does that over the length of all the vertices that you have. Well, our next vertice in this model is all the way down here. So if I don't like this, now in this case with this model, we're going to be doing like a cinder block kind of like rock texture on it. So it might not show up a ton, but there's a really simple, very simple and easy way of getting it to work and look a lot better. So first I'm just going to turn off the roof here. And I'm going to tab back in, and you can see I still have these facets. All I'm going to do is take a loop cut and slide, and I'm going to move it up close to the top. And so what's going to happen is now the transition from a creased edge to an uncreased edge, this transition is going to only happen to this distance from here to here. So if I tab out, you can see that it looks a lot better over the length of the entire object. However, it's still wrecked right here because of my door. And again, we'll do that in a separate demo because we're going to have to fix that. Even if it doesn't do this, you're still going to have to fix your Boolean issues, okay? And the reason why we have to fix that is for texturing. And a UV unwrapping, it's best to have a better setup. So now, the other thing that I can do here is if I go and take a look at this, you can see that this is it's actually not too bad. Did I sharpen that by accident? I don't think I did. I did not. Oh, that's because that's the floor. Where's that? There's the second floor. So you can see that in here, down at the bottom of this object, is still very rounded, okay? We don't want that. We want it to be a sharp edge as well. I could have taken care of that when I did the first edge, but I want to show you another little option here, so I didn't. And that is, when you've got the modifier here, you can actually turn it off. So it's really hard to see, if I tab into my thing, where is the edge that I'm trying to select. It's very difficult to actually see it. You've got a couple options. What I normally do is I tab off or click off the eyeball so that I can see my original vertices. I'll select them, then I tab it back in to do the edge crease and make sure that it works right, which is what I'm going to do in a second. The other option is this last button, which is turned off by default, which actually conforms your mesh or your edges to the mesh itself. And you can see how if I turn it off, you can see that that goes all the way around, and then that does not. Oh, that's interesting. So when I did that loop cut and slide, it didn't even go all the way across because of the door. So that door, the Boolean door that I did, really messes things up. And we'll talk about that again tomorrow. But so you can see that if I turn that on, that it really changes the way things look, okay? I don't generally like that because I find that you can really mess up your editing, but I could select my Alt-right click, there's the mesh that I'm doing. But I think some people might be confused, like is it this one, is it that one, like what's going on? So I just prefer to turn it off real quickly. Oh, see, I did select the wrong one. Right click on the correct one, make sure that it goes all the way around, okay? And, oh, look, it didn't. And I know why it didn't. It actually did. This is part of the problem with the door, is I actually have a very small lip here where it didn't connect in with my, my original edge. We'll fix that tomorrow. I keep saying that, but I mean it. So now I'm going to turn the eyeball back on. I've got my edge selected, and now I can hit Shift-E, and I can choose how much of this I want. Well, I want it to be a full 100%, so there we go. And that's my edge select. So does that make sense? I'm not quite done yet, but I've got one more thing I wanted to show you. But that is your edge creasing. And I would go in and I would highlight this edge of the door, both inside the door, and you got to make sure you get everything. There's a little doodad right there. We're going to take care of him tomorrow too in the other demo. And then I would take and do an edge crease for the outside of the door here, even though it's actually not going to help us when it comes to what's going on here with the door. You can see I can't see anything. And so then I'll go there, and we still have this little doodad here. We got that little guy. We can't forget about him. Notice I'm clicking slightly above. That helps me keep from clicking on something that I do not want to crease. Okay, so slightly above. See, there I just selected on a side that horizontal piece. That looks good, and I'll crease it. So I've creased it. Even though the door is not really working, I've creased it so that it's ready to go. And tomorrow when we start working on this to get rid of our problems with the door, it's basically ready to go. So now, let's talk about another modifier that's actually really important and can help you greatly, and I mean greatly. So what we're going to do here is we're going to turn on, I have this, there's the door. I have this cube here, that's the door frame. And if I tab out and I kind of go here like this, you can see that the door frame does not match the actual door cutout anymore. And that, when I scaled it up, it was all messed up. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make this match it. But here's the problem. I've got to match it on both sides of the thing, right? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to do this and match it, but only have to do one side, which is really, really cool. So I am going to turn off my tower, just so that this is a little easier at first. And I'm going to hit the 7 key, and it's going to launch me into a vertical view here. Wireframe, hit the A key to deselect everything, go to vertices select mode, use my circle selector again, and I'm going to select all the vertices on this half of the yellow circle. See that little yellow circle? That's the center of my object. Right-click to lock that in. Now you can see I've got all those selected. I am not selecting the centermost vertices. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete them. X, delete all my vertices. And that's why I didn't select those ones, is because I wanted them to stay, because they're right in the middle of the object. Now we're going to go to a cool modifier called the mirror modifier. Now, by default it mirrors in the X, so I'm going to turn that off, and we're going to click the Y. Now I can have the same thing on both sides, and it will stay perfectly symmetrical. You probably see where I'm going with this. However, there's a couple things I wanted to show you. The biggest thing being this clipping button here. If I have that unchecked, let's say select all, I can do this or I can do that, okay? But if I have clipping selected, it doesn't allow me to do that, which is really cool. It keeps the center point the same. And that's pretty much almost always what you want to do. So now I'm going to take my tower and turn it back on again here, and we can see exactly where things are going to be. So I can go to wireframe mode, and I'm just going to take an Alt right click, go back to regular mode, and I'm just going to bring that down until I see it take over just under that. So I'm actually going to sync this just below the door, the actual door frame itself in the tower. So then I'll go back to wireframe mode. I'm going to Alt right click, and now I need to do more than just sync it down. I need to bring it over. So I'm actually going to stay in wireframe mode for a second here. I'm going to bring it over like that and just kind of make sure that it's right on top of that vertice. And you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect, just close enough. And then now I'm going to go back, hit the Z key again, go back, and then bring it down until it just pops through and starts to cover it. Then you can see this one and this one match, and the reason why they match is because they are made from the same object. Okay, so they have the same number of vertices. So I'll Alt right click, just make sure everything's good, and bring this over. Z key, make sure that it goes through right at the right moment, or right place. Now we're going to have a little bit more of a complicated thing here, because I want to move this whole corner together first, and then I can modify how big it is and stuff like that later. So I'm going to hit the A key to deselect everything, then Alt right click, and then Alt Shift right, whoops, that didn't work. Alt Shift right click there, and then Shift right click those two vertices like that. So now I've got this whole thing selected. Just going to double check, make sure that doesn't select the bottom. Yep, that's cool. And now what I'm going to do is, if you take a look, I need to move it down and over. But when I move it over, if I do that and I'm not careful, it's going to slant in. So here I'm only going to move it down. So I might even hit the 3 key so that I'm flat on. And I'm just going to move that right into the position. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, and I'm also going to, I'll just use the circle selector and select those as well. I don't have to hold shift or anything like that. Just when you paint with the circle selector, it's like you're holding shift down. Now I can move the whole thing in until it just pops through like that. There we go. And what's cool is, notice as I'm doing that, the mirror modifier is making all the same changes on the other side so that it's completely symmetrical and it's working perfectly. Now this only works, however, if your center of your object, which is represented by that little yellow dot, is in the center. So it's really important when you're creating objects to be mindful of the center of the object and try keeping everything centered if possible. This also helps when you bring objects into Unity, because Unity does recognize where the center of an object is, and if you want it to rotate or to pivot or anything like that, you need to be mindful of where that is, because that's the pivot point of an object as well. So if I wanted to rotate a door, I actually would want to put the door off-center so that the hinges of the door were along the center point. Does that make sense, everybody? So be mindful of that center point. Okay, so now we just have a few more issues. One, it's kind of getting a little skinny here, so I'm going to switch to edge select mode, and I'm just going to select this, and I'm going to make some adjustments here until it looks more natural. I probably am doing this the wrong way. I probably should rotate them or whatever, but it's working. And that looks pretty good. I might bring that down just a touch, and this one down just a touch as well. I was moving the wrong thing. So I should have noticed that it hadn't selected what I couldn't see the edge there. And we'll just make that a little thinner there. That looks good. Now we've got one more problem to cover, and that's right here. We have to move these things up to kind of take care of it. I'm going to leave this towards the end, and I'm going to start with this one. Now the bottom of this is actually pretty flat. If I go to that, the bottom is actually flat. So I don't want to move the whole thing. I just want to move this top edge. So I'm just going to make sure that's selected. I'm going to move it up until it just pops right through there, like that. Then I'll do the same thing with this one. There we go, just like that. And then the center one, and you can see how it's moving evenly across the board. And then click here on this last one, and there. Now, if I wanted to, and it probably would have been wiser, Alt right click, get all 4 of those, and move the whole thing up so that they're even. Okay, just like that. Give it a look 3. So I can move that one up. 3 on the numpad, and I can make that as even as possible so that it's really straight across. Does that make sense? The mirror modifier is fantastic. Now, once I'm ready, I can tab out of the object, get out of edit mode, and then I can apply the modifier. You can't apply the modifier until you are in object mode, by the way. If you try to do it in edit mode, it will scream at you and tell you you're doing things horribly wrong and ruin your self-esteem. So what we're going to do is we'll hit apply, and now if I tab back into edit mode, you can see I've got all my vertices back. A couple days later, if I find out that I made a mistake, honestly, the easiest thing to do is probably delete half of the object, re-add the modifier, and start modifying it again, and then reapply the modifier when I'm ready. Especially with such a simple object like this, it's actually really, really, really easy. So those are 2 new things for you to learn, okay? The mirror modifier and the subdivision surface modifier. They are both extraordinarily helpful. Although, as I've already illustrated, if I click on our tower, turn that back on, they can make a mess of booleans if the booleans are not done correctly. The other thing that I'm noticing here really quickly, just as an additional thing, and we'll do a demo on this too, notice how this is a completely different color than the tower. I think that means that my normals may be backwards. So I'm going to tab into that, hit select all, A key. I'm going to go normals, recalculate the outside. Notice that it changes colors to match the tower. Now it's got that normal gray color on there. So if you see an object that is more of a dark blue, that means that you are seeing the wrong side of the normals, and your object will be transparent from the outside once you load it into Unity. That's really important to kind of keep in mind and watch for. Does all of this make sense? Okay, I think it's pretty simple. These are so handy. They are, I mean, this is bread and butter of Blender here. If you learn what I taught you in the last demo, loop cut, slides, extrusions, okay, and edge creases, and mirror modifier and subdivision surface modifier, if you know these things, you can build so much in Blender without having to know anything else more complicated than that. It's amazing what you can do with just these simple tools. And then tomorrow or the next day, I'll do another demo that's going to show us how we can fix the doors by filling and merging points again and working with vertices a little bit more specifically to fix that object, and that will be basically a good start into how you can really make some awesome objects in Blender. Okie dokie. That's it. Let's get to work.